We've had high-level government officials, including the vice president, going on national television saying bureaucrats at the Fed should not be setting the interest rate. That should be set by the president. I don't agree with that. And I didn't agree with that before I ever got to the Fed. The era of heroes is done. The miracles aren't there. None of us is going to fill Paul Volcker's shoes. He was a giant man.
He was huge.
Physically and spiritually. I hope to God that we will always maintain this last bastion of conscious deliberation based on fact and that it won't become politicized. That would be troubling.
Hello and welcome to a very special Thanksgiving episode of Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I'm Felix Salmon of Bloomberg. I'm here with Elizabeth Spires of the New York Times.
Hello.
I'm here with Emily Peck of Axios.
Hello, hello.
And we are going to be talking this week with the president of the Chicago Fed. We are going to be talking to Austan Goolsbee, who probably needs no introduction. He's been in the headlines for, well, ever since the Obama campaign in 2008. When he was advising the candidate Obama on economic policy, he went into the White House. He has now switched over to monetary policy. We're going to talk about that switch. We're going to basically talk about what is the Fed. He is a voting member some of the time on the Open Market Committee that sets interest rates. We're going to ask, how do they set interest rates? What do they think about what happens in the room? How have things changed since the days of Volcker and Greenspan? We have a whole Slate Plus segment on whether he's a dog person or a cat person, and Emily does not like the answer. It's a really, really good conversation, so stay tuned. It's all coming up on Slate Money. So I feel, Austin, that like everyone, whenever you do media interviews, everyone wants to know about monetary policy and what's going to happen to interest rates and whether you think they should go up or down. And I have a certain amount of appetite for that, but not much. What I really want to know is just like, I want to zoom way back out. I want to just know, what is it that you do, not so much in your like Chicago Fed, but specifically at the FOMC in the room when interest rates are being set. There's like this committee, and we see the minutes occasionally. But I'm just going to come out and say that 99% of Slate Money listeners have never read a copy of the Fed minutes.
Yeah, I didn't know that the minutes came out. Or with a lag, it's going to come out word for word transcript. You want to see what happens. You got to wait a few years, but they'll tell you word for word.
Years down the line. So what happens? Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't know this. I had never been there. 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I come to the Fed, and within a couple of weeks is the first meeting, and I'm a voter at the very first meeting that I'm going to. I got to say, if you're an econ nerd, like I am, like you guys are, it's about the coolest thing in the world. You go in, it's a huge room with a giant table, biggest table I've ever seen. And they sit all around the table in assigned seats. So I'm right next to Mary Daly, the president of San Francisco, and Neil Kashkari, the president of Minneapolis, are on the two sides of me all the time. And the shades come down so that nobody can spy, and you're not allowed to bring your phone in, and there's no communication with the outside world.
So no one can be like, I need to Google that. You need to like send a person.
Yeah, no, there's no Google.
That.
You got to have it. You got to have it sorted out before you get in there. If somebody says something and you're like, I don't think that's true, you can wait till the break and then you run back in the other room and check your phone. But there's no real time fact checking in there. One side of the table is the staff, and the Fed staff will have a series of briefings. Here's what the official forecast is. You'll get a briefing from the markets desk about the balance sheet and what's happening with rates. They'll have an international briefing. Once a quarter, they'll do the financial stability briefing, and then they're going to go around the table. Day one, it's a 2-day thing. Day one is about the economy, and day two is about the rates. And day two is when you vote on the rates.
And then, so I just need to ask, like, when you're listening to all of these briefings and then you're doing day one talking about the economy, is there a voice in the back of your head going like, can we just like get all of this passed so that we can get to the meat of it and start talking about rates? Or is it actually super important to have all of that first?
Well, relatedly, how much of that conversation has already happened outside of the room before you show up?
Those are both good questions. The difference in having the briefing in person rather than they do send you in the all of the banks. I think I certainly know in Chicago we take this super seriously, and so the whole week before the meeting, we're intensively going through. They send the Teal book, which has lots of the material already, and we will have analyzed that and have our views of it. You can ask questions of the staff in a way that you can't ask questions of the Teal book itself. And
Books
so
are
that's
famously
helpful.
mute. You try and ask a question of a book, and it just like.
So, what
books.
do you think, Teal book? Speak up for yourself. So that can be instructive, but it does have a certain formality to it, for sure. Both the meeting and the kind of the Fed itself. Now, then we switch to the other people, and kind of Elizabeth's question is more to the, what, are you debating it in the room, or are you debating it? Have you debated it before? People take pretty seriously, I think, the idea that everybody's coming there with an independent view. So there's not really debate ahead of time, or at least nobody's calling to invite me into the debate. Maybe it is, but I'm not
Although
invited.
it kind of happens in the media, right? Everyone's giving
But it
interviews.
kind of happens in the media.
I assume you know what your colleagues' opinions are, where they're probably going to land?
Yeah, maybe, but I'm mostly getting that, monitoring it through their speeches in the media, and they're going to go around the table. I mean, the main thing is that we go all day and we go around the table, and each of the 19 people is going to say their piece, 7 to 10 minutes about where we are in the economy. And that's really instructive. And it's fascinating to me seeing how they're coming from not everybody's I have a research economics background, academic. There are a few economists, there are business people, there are people with a banking background, a markets background. I found it really interesting, really fun to kind of hear what they have to say. People are scripted. There's not like a lot of interrupting and like, no, that's not true. That doesn't happen. But a debate, it is a deliberative body, and a debate does take place, but it kind of takes place across meetings, as I describe it, that everybody will say their piece. You bring a plus one, usually your research director or your monetary policy advisor, and that person is furiously writing down everything that the other people are saying. And then we come back and we'll analyze what just happened. What did they say? Do we agree with that? And then you're getting ready at the next one. In a way, you're kind of refuting or reacting to what they said. It's pretty amazing, actually. I think
it sounds to me that like people have their 7 to 10 minute speech pretty much worked out before they even enter the room.
Yeah, mostly.
And the ability of the Fed chair or anyone else to move them off that sort of predetermined position is relatively limited. And so like the outcome moment, I think in that moment. True. So the outcome of the vote is like if you did a poll, before everyone walked into the room of how everyone was going to vote, like 9 times out of 10 or 19 times out of 20, that would be exactly how they voted at the end of day 2.
Yes, but there's probably even a stronger form of that. If you just go look at the votes, if you just predicted everyone's going to vote yes on alternative B, you would almost always be right. Almost all the votes are unanimous. So part of you looks at that and says, hey, well, if they're all unanimous votes, then they must not have much diversity of thought. But that's misleading. That's very misleading, because Jay Powell, he's the only chair that I've worked with, but he's got a remarkable talent for talking. He knows, in a way, I think he does the poll you're describing ahead of time, but he's the only one who truly knows. If my colleagues don't get up and literally say, I intend to vote X, there is still a question mark of what's going to happen. Now, we're meeting every 6 weeks, so there is a sense in which at most moments the meeting is not on the margin. So if you went and looked at the loose prediction in the markets,
well, you're
what do
in
they
Chicago.
think is going to happen?
The Fed futures are traded in your district.
No, exactly. It's traded like right down the street. And in most meetings, that is either close to 0% or close to 100%. And it's only in meetings where something's going to happen and it's uncertain. I don't know if I totally. You might be right in a technical sense that literally when we come there on that day, it's determined. But that's not to say that if you backed up a few days, it was determined. And I will often go into meetings without having my mind totally made up, and I want to hear what the other members had to say before.
Now, this is exactly where I was going with this, because I find this, because like, while in you're absolutely right that in the overwhelming majority of meetings, the outcome, according to the Fed Fund futures, is predetermined. Basically, everyone knows what it's going to be and it's going to happen. But that is partly because you can have dissent and then you still have a majority voting for the thing that everyone wants the majority to vote for. Yeah. So the thing I'm interested in is when you come in without like a very strong prior of I really need to vote for 25 or I really need to vote for 0, whatever you want, and then you realize that this Fed chair who you admire is kind of like moving in this direction, everyone else is kind of moving in that direction, and it kind of just makes sense for you to be like, well, like, all of these like really smart people have all kind of coalesced around this particular course of action, alternative B, and I'll throw in my vote. And there is value to being able to come out with a Fed statement saying like, this was unanimous, we all thought this, right? Like, so that's part of the job of a Fed chair, right?
And that is part of the job of a Fed chair. Yeah, I was going to say the rules, as you know, I'm only allowed to speak for myself, not for what anybody else thinks. I'm enough of does it make me ornery of something? I don't feel like anybody's going to tell me, hey, we really expect you to vote this way, or the markets expect this, so we have to give it to them. Paul Volcker was my mentor and really almost a personal hero to me. And one of the things that when we worked together, he would always say is the Fed's job is to act and the market's job is to react, and let's not get the order mixed up. And I do kind of think that the Fed futures estimation, there is a reflection problem in that. If you start going down the path of like, well, we should just do what we are expected to do, that's not a necessarily equilibrium.
But isn't the chair setting those expectations in advance? I mean, that's
in a way that's the point.
That's why you'll
insight.
Have the chair phoning up John Hilsenrath and saying like, "Oh,
yeah,
right." But look, that's the insight that it can't be. I think that we take what the market's expectations as we can't do X because the market doesn't expect it. That's a dangerous thing to do. That's what I say when I say it's not an equilibrium. Is if the market only thinks what it is because they because of what we already did, you can get yourself into a little bit of a mistaken pickle. Not to mix metaphors, but you can tie yourself up in a bit of a problem.
So when inflation, was first going up under Biden and the Fed was kind of slow in responding to it, and then in terms of setting expectations, the Wall Street Journal had a story that was like dynamite. It was like Nick Timros at the time, I think he reported there was going to be a 0.75 percentage point rate hike. And it was like, whoa. And everyone was kind of like, whoa. And so then, there was a meeting.
Then the expectations will be, there'll be a 75-point increase.
Right. So the expectation was set or reset by someone. We don't know where Nick gets his information from. And then there was a vote.
Although we do know when Nick gets his information.
So do you know what I mean? Like the order of operations.
I don't know.
The order of operations would say like the vote was preordained, right?
It sounds like you are you're hunting for bear. You're wanting to say, but what about this? But you're just stating I agree with you.
Okay,
I'm exactly what you said.
I'm just not smart enough to understand. I need to repeat it.
I don't want. There are people, if you go watch out in public, there are people who say the Fed cannot do blank because the market does not expect it. And I reject that reasoning because most of what the market expects is just reflecting what they think we're already going to do. So I don't want to base what we choose to do based on what they think we were going to do.
There is a vote, but coming into the vote, it's sort of already been decided. Like in the case I'm talking about, there was a message 0.75 percentage points. The vote happened after that. The message came from the Fed. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, what does the vote really mean at that point?
Let me separate those into two parts, because there are two important ideas, and they're kind of a joint hypothesis in that. Just take out somebody talked to the media, and that's why the expectations changed. Okay, so the question that Felix is kind of sniffing around too of, isn't this a sham of a vote? And I'm arguing it's not real. It is a deliberative body, and there is movement, but there is an alternative B that comes with a statement, and that is the thing that we vote on. Now, the chair doesn't just get to sit down and write, here's what the alternative B statement is with no input from everyone else. There is a process that before the meeting, it will say, here's the proposed Alt A, which is there's always one that's kind of dovish. There's alternative B that we vote on, and there's an alternative C, which is more hawkish, and they each have language, and they'll send around the proposed language, and that's their argument. You can give comments, and they do get revised based on what the comments are.
Is this during the meeting or before the meeting?
No, this is before the meeting. This is
okay.
For a week before the meeting, and therein lies a bit of the diplomatic skill of the chair. That one way you get to unanimous votes is you have to find language that everybody could agree on, and if you just charged ahead, if you were the chair and you were like, I don't care what anybody says in the committee, here's what you're voting on, the chances of a lot more dissents would go way up if you didn't have that diplomatic skill.
So
Elizabeth.
This kind of speaks a little bit to different philosophical positions about how you should run the Fed and the extent to which you are obligated to communicate both to the market and to regular people. And, Jay Powell has been very I would say forward-facing, more aggressive about communication. Certainly, at the opposite end of the spectrum, kind of Alan Greenspan type who blinks twice and you're supposed to determine something from it. How do you view this, especially in the context of what we're talking about, and in a political environment where the Fed is probably more politicized than usual, which is not to say that it isn't always politicized. And people voters don't fully understand what the Fed does. How do you view the communication?
All of those are important contexts. Now, I start by look, I was an academic for 30 years studying the economy. I wasn't there when the inflation was going crazy. Whatever critiques of the Fed, I probably agree with them. I wasn't there. Don't blame me. We've been cutting inflation since I got there. As we kind of think through what's the commitment to transparency, how much transparency is the right amount, that's an important topic. I'm more in the camp that I think we should, there's massive declines in public trust of all major institutions, of the government, of banks, of anything that's perceived to be faceless and elite. And it's kind of like the Fed is right in the nugget of the whole Venn diagram on that thing. So I think that it's really important to convey as much as possible to both the market and to the semi-interested public. What is the Fed? What do we do? As I always say, we're not the bad guys. We are the guardians of the galaxy. We're running $5 trillion a day of payments in the United States. Wire transfer, ACH, direct deposit. We're all the cash that exists in the economy gets distributed through the Feds. We got a vault with billions of dollars down in the basement, and we're running it in and out. And we're out in our districts talking to business leaders, talking to civic leaders, and bringing that knowledge back to these FOMC meetings every 6 weeks. And that's how it's supposed to be. That's how they built the Federal Reserve in 1913. They were just as suspicious about the idea that Washington, D.C. alone or in concert with Wall Street would control the whole financial system of the United States with no input from the rest of the country. That's why they built the system that we have.
Austin, let me ask Elizabeth's question in a slightly different way, which is the
that was the polite way to say I'm taking too long. I was answering it.
You were saying that this is built into the to the Fed structure, and it's important to be transparent and communicative and this kind of thing. I just want to say, if you had gone back to Alan Greenspan and said you should give a press conference after every FOMC meeting, he would have
objected. And they asked Volcker.
If you had asked
what's
Volcker,
the key? If you asked Volcker, he hated the press conference. I would talk to him when the press conference started. His attitude was, this is the Fed. The Fed does not justify its actions. And the thought that Nick Timiraos would be asking a follow-up and kind of hounding the Fed chair, wait a minute, but you said whatever. His view was the most important thing for the Fed is mystique. That's what it, but that's in the modern economic understanding of central banks. It's not just the Fed. The mystique, magic, Fed as magician, that's old school. You asked me, I think transparency is an important goal, and we have a committee. There are some people who don't like hearing from a bunch of different members of the committee. They say essentially it would be a lot easier if there was just one voice and everybody would just get on the script and tell us what the script is.
What is everyone with the one voice lately?
No,
Everyone's
that's
unitary, one voice. No, it's a democracy.
That's not how the committee is structured. So we shouldn't have one voice. You should want to hear, just like there's no one voice in the Senate. You go and Senator A thinks this, Senator B thinks that, and you go figure out where do they stand.
I feel like all three of you. You guys have one voice. I am going to be the one dissenting voice here. I'm going to be team Tall Paul, and I'm going to be there was real value to the Mystique and Aura era. Back in the Volcker era, not only were there no press conferences, there weren't even any press releases, and in fact,
you didn't even know what the decision was.
Even know what the decision was. You needed to kind of look at the New York desk and try and work out what the new rate was, because no one was going to tell you. I think there was real utility to that, and what you were just saying, Austin, is that something changed after the Greenspan era. And the thing that changed was that during the financial crisis under Bernanke, the Fed decided that it needed more than just interest rates as a tool. It needed this thing called forward guidance. And so the only way that it could do forward guidance was to come out very loudly and say in very explicit words, not only are we going to have interest rates at zero now, but we're going to keep interest rates at zero for a substantially long time into the future. And they really wanted to communicate that. And that was when the Fed switched over to, oh, shit, we need to communicate.
Also,
because it had
a
no-
wildly
doing this on
different
purpose?
media environment.
you know, I think that I've never been that big of a fan of forward guidance, and I was kind of critical of forward guidance. So now you're trapping me into what I'm saying. The press conference is good, the transparency is good, and you're like, so you do like forward guidance. No, I don't. I know I don't.
Hey there! Before we get back to the show, I want to tell you about The Slatest, which is Slate's daily newsletter that lands in your inbox every evening. It's written by Slate's editor-in-chief, Hilary Fry, and it is the perfect way to end your day a little smarter than you began it. Every issue pulls together the sharpest stories, the most surprising news, and the can't-miss Slate podcasts, including this one, plus smart analysis and a bit of well-earned distraction. From DC to Hollywood to the algorithm, The Slatest keeps you clued in to the world and to Slate. You can sign up right now at slate.com/theslatest.
Look, I think Elizabeth's point about the media environment, partly you are bemoaning an old world that doesn't exist anymore. You want the Hollywood star system, and you're like, there used to be stars like Marilyn Monroe. There were giants of the Fed like Paul Volcker. And they don't know the era of heroes is done. The miracles aren't there. None of us is going to fill Paul Volcker's shoes. He was a giant man.
He was huge.
Physically and spiritually. And so this is where we are. I still think if you tried to go back to the days of mystique with the people who we are now, that'd be a terrible mistake because there would be a lot of confusion and this erosion of public trust. That's why I want to start with the erosion of public trust. I think the only answer to eroding public trust is forthrightness and treating people like adults and saying, hey, we aren't magicians. We're trying to figure it out. The hardest thing the central bank has to do is figure out the through line in moments of transition and try to get the timing right.
I would disagree that at the time when Paul Volcker was setting interest rates of 15%, that the public trusted him and was like, oh, Paul Volcker, you're a giant. We trust you to do the right thing. I think he was deeply unpopular, not only in the country, but
when
also
the interest rates were that high. I'm
Yeah.
sure you're right. Yeah, they were. His widow, when he died, gave me the original 2x4 that they sent him. And it says, it's scribbled on it. It says, please lower these insane interest rates. And I keep that on the shelf right next to my desk to remind me, A, to remind me of him, but B, to remind me what we do impacts the real economy. And sometimes the Fed's got to do stuff that the administration doesn't like, the public doesn't like. So I'm not talking about winning a popularity contest. I'm talking about if you tried to do what Greenspan did now or Volcker did now in terms of you'll get nothing and like it. That's a message. We're going to tell you nothing. We're not going to tell you what we did. We're not going to tell you this. Do you think that would improve the public trust in the Fed? It's a theory. I kind of think not. I kind of think that it wouldn't. But maybe it would. I just think the environment has changed.
I would also say the environment changed and public trust was eroded, not because the public just woke up one day and was like, everything's a conspiracy, I trust no one. But Ben Bernanke,
what do you think it was?
There was a financial crisis in 2008. Yeah. People lost their jobs. People lost their houses. People, they had to leave their houses. They were sold, a lot of them, these mortgages they couldn't afford.
For sure, that's true.
The whole system was revealed to be like in a very, very bad place. The public couldn't just say, "Oh, we can trust the Fed. The Fed knows what they're doing." The public was reckoning with record high foreclosures, a massive loss of wealth. Stock market was in the dumps.
Financial crisis. I accept that the actual conditions, and fast forward 21, 22, inflation is almost double digits. People hate inflation. So you see in the polls, some 80% of people say they're not familiar with the Fed or what they do, but 75% of the people are saying, but they know they're doing a bad job, whatever that job is.
Right. I'm not saying the Fed caused the financial crisis. I'm just saying after the financial crisis, you couldn't let the Fed operate behind a curtain with mystique. The mystique was gone. The economy was in a shambles.
That's another good point. That does go a little bit, though, it sounds like, to Felix's thing of, if the Fed is going to engage in unusual conduct, or it's a very unusual moment, like you're hitting the zero lower bound and you literally can't cut rates anymore, do you have to? That's in the spirit of your comment. Like, basically, the public will not stand for you just doing a bunch of things with no explanation.
This is kind of to your point,
in
and
that kind of a moment.
To Emily's point, I think members of the public, not members of the market, not sophisticated, economic actors, when they think about these economic indicators and the things that the Fed controls, and inflation in particular, they think about, and interest rates. They tie inflation to things, for example, very often that have to do with things that are outside of core CPI.
Yeah,
like
right.
gas
like
prices.
Gas prices, exactly.
Yeah, and so I think
price of milk.
Gas
like
prices
as
being the ultimate vibes economy indicator.
Yep.
But with interest rates, they always think about it in the context of personal home mortgages.
Right. We don't even set. We're not setting the mortgage rates.
But this is how the public understands both inflation and interest rates.
Yes, you're right.
Which is very different from the way the market understands it.
You're totally right.
So how do you manage that?
My only concluding thought on the trust is, I do think there have been performance problems in the economy that contributed to the lack of trust and undermined confidence. And also that you've seen big drops in trust in the military, educational institutions, the courts, a whole bunch of things that didn't have to do with the economy.
Emily and I are not saying that this is fair.
So something's going.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not your fault.
I can see the argument that in this world of reduced trust in institutions, the one thing you can do is increase transparency. And obviously, as a journalist, I'm very open to this argument.
Yeah, you're like, yes, give us more. I think the investment in the local, like the regional character of the FOMC makes it pretty distinct from any other central bank in the world. Even the ECB, those are different countries that are represented. We're I think the only place that has a wide regional representation from within the country. And I actually think that was a certain element of genius in that from the beginning, because people are more, now it ends up, people are more rooted in their local. They like their congressman, even as they report they hate Congress. They like their bank, even as they report they hate banks. And that local aspect, I think there is potentially some more trust to be found in that.
This raises a big question that I've really wanted to ask you for some time, which is, when you walk in and you cast your vote for what you think interest rates should be, are you casting your vote on behalf of the people of your district, on behalf of the people of the United States?
Mostly on behalf of the people of the United States. I am informed by the people in my district, but we're explicitly supposed to be taking a national view, and the Federal Reserve Act doesn't specify. It says when we're setting monetary policy, we're supposed to be maximizing employment and stabilizing prices, which we've collectively interpreted to be an inflation rate of 2%. So that's a good question, but I think the answer to it is pretty clear. We're supposed to be taking a national view.
Can I ask you a question that under any normal administration I would not have to ask or wouldn't be interesting?
I didn't know where you were going with that. Can I ask you a question that in any normal administration you would hang up on me?
Well, it just wouldn't even be an issue.
Yeah.
I think right now, I talk to Trump voters, and aside from just sometimes not understanding what the Fed does, there is an abolish the Fed palpable activist movement.
Right.
What do you, if you're faced with somebody like that who says, I don't trust central banking because it's kind of this weird government private sector hybrid that doesn't make sense to me, or maybe it's just general distrust of any situation where you have experts in a room making decisions. What do you tell those people? How do you explain the need for the Fed to people who maybe don't understand how it works?
It probably depends on which is the nature of the conspiracy that they employ, because there are a lot of Fed haters that come from different perspectives. So there's one which is sort of the gold standard, rooted in the gold standard, folks, that their worldview, and that's kind of the traditional money, the creation of fiat money is itself bogus and is intended to debase the currency of the country. And they tend to say we should go back to a gold standard, or we should have some discipline and be a hard money system. If we start to go into it, there are clear reasons why every country of the world got off the gold standard and nobody went back to it, which include things like when stuff starts going wrong, the gold standard forces you to do the opposite of what you want to do. So the depression begins and the gold standard forces you to start raising the interest rate and driving the economy farther into the ground. So it's fundamentally unstable in a crisis. There is a separate, so one style is the traditional abolish the Fed and replace it with a rule. And the problem with rules, I'm sympathetic to whether it's a Taylor rule. In the olden days, that were kind of Milton Friedman, we should just have a constant growth rate of money. That foundered on the rocks of what counts as money has been changing over time. And in the formula, the velocity of money is not a constant, so it's up and down and all around. And so targeting those monetary aggregates didn't work that well. I'm sympathetic that we think about Taylor rules or other formulae, I don't know how to, formulas that...
like NGDP targeting? What do you think of that?
Yeah, look, let's think through all of those. But exactly the thing that makes me hesitant to consider rules that are widely debunked, like let's go back to a gold standard rule. Ask yourself, not in normal times, this is kind of like the worst version of a self-driving car mechanism. Yeah, okay, fine. The self-driving car can drive when there's no traffic, it's clear weather, you're driving down a highway. The test of the rule is, does it give you insight when stuff is going wrong or when there are very complex dynamics that are unlike things that have happened before? And my read of the rules is it would be a big mistake to commit ahead of time to not have discretion. And
so let me since you brought up the subject of car crashes,
speaking of train wrecks, let's
of
talk
train
about
wrecks,
your behavior.
Let's talk about Argentina. No, there was I remember reading in a biography of Paul Volcker once where things were going very badly, just in terms of he had to keep on raising interest rates and he was deeply unpopular, and he actually found himself coming very close to being outvoted at the FOMC meeting, and he felt that if that should ever happen, then he was honor bound to resign as Fed chair, and all hell would have broken loose. And there is a world coming down the pike where an increasing number of FOMC members are in one way or another MAGA, like we have one already now, and the voices on the FOMC are going to be much more fractious and much less aligned than they ever were in the past, and that the votes are not going to be even close to unanimous, and that this is the point at which all of your vaunted transparency is just going to make the car crash that much more visible. And like, is that really what we want?
Is it a car crash, or is the transparency going to allow us to avoid the car crash? I mean, that's kind of my question. So there has been a tradition, it feels like, that governors, especially, that is, political appointees who are there in Washington, not the Reserve Bank presidents, who are kind of supposed to be independent voices already, that they don't dissent. And if the governors dissent against the chair, that has a meaning. And that was the case of what happened back in the Volcker episode you're describing, that the Fed had been extremely muscular, Fed funds rate up to 20%, holding it there until inflation was coming down. And there had been a number of new appointees who called a meeting for themselves and evidently were going to vote against the chair, that the chair was going to be in the minority. And Volcker said, if this goes through, I'm resigning on the spot. And they came back and they re-voted. And so, but in a way, they put him on notice. That era is done. The Volcker era is done. And actually, he retired soon after that. Does it need to be the case that we always vest so much in unanimity? I don't know. As I said, none of us on the committee are supposed to be talking about what other people think or how they're going to vote. I would just say I've found fascinating, as we talked about at the beginning, I found fascinating the worldviews espoused by the people around the table. And I would just say my experience is not at all political. So you said they're going to be MAGA governors. My experience is that the people around this table take the job extremely seriously. And you'll see when the transcript comes out, it's not about politics. It's about what do people think is the economic outlook and what do they think the data say. So I hope I hope to God that we will always maintain that is this last bastion of deliberation, conscious deliberation based on fact, and that it won't become politicized in some way like that. I think that would be troubling.
I have one last tiny provocation, which is that, and it's apolitical though. It's how would the Fed communicate a stagflation situation, given that people don't necessarily even understand the dual mandate?
Now you threw me off. We have a dual mandate. So whether people understand it or not, the law requires us, the Fed, to maximize employment and stabilize prices. I try to say what I was saying before the tariffs came in. You can go back and read my speeches from really almost a year ago. And I said, if we have big tariffs, this is going to be one of the more troubling things a central bank ever has to confront, which is a stagflationary direction shock where both sides of the mandate get worse at the same time. Because there's not an obvious playbook of what you do. Usually, you're not in a low, higher, low fire environment. For example, you're either in low, higher, high fire or high, higher, low fire. And so you either tighten or loosen to heat it up or cool it down. If both things are going wrong, the Fed has to come to it. In a way, we talked about this a little bit in the framework review. We identified that we're going to try to figure out which side of the mandate is getting worse quicker and by more, and how long do we think each error is going to last, and we're going to be in a business of we're trying to strike a balance. And to your point, I think stagflationary episodes, which are not caused by the Fed, and there's hardly anything the Fed can do about them, because we can't pump oil and we can't build data centers and we can't, well, if, there are a bunch of things that the Fed cannot do, and yet they are exactly the episodes when people blame the central bank the most. They're like, look at what the central bank is doing. The unemployment rate is up. They expect you to fix it
on some level.
Yeah, they're
think
like,
you
go
can
fix it.
Yeah.
We'll have to figure that out. And I'm a little nervous that we're in a juniorized version of that right now, in that we said, hey, if you put in big tariffs, this threatens to make the job market worse and drive up prices at the same time. And now we're seeing some signs that the job market is getting worse and some signs that the inflation is going up, and we've been above target for a long time, and it's heading the wrong way. So it may be sooner than we wanted that we're gonna have to come to some terms on that.
So let me just finish with the mother of all questions, which is exactly to your point. Like, you know, the government, the president and Congress has the power to do all manner of things with tariffs. You have worked in the White House. You understand the power of fiscal policy. You now are working at the Fed, and you understand the power of monetary policy. Who's more powerful?
I think fiscal is way more powerful on a long-term basis than is monetary. The advantage of the monetary, just the setting of interest rates, is a very primitive tool. It's basically just a screwdriver. You can tighten it, you can loosen it. That's all there is. But we're meeting every 6 weeks, and that can have more. We can respond to the business cycle in real time in a way that fiscal policy has trouble doing so. And so it's in this lane, let me get on the camera. This narrow of a lane is the monetary policy lane, but it makes a huge difference in that part of the universe. Everything else in the universe is fiscal policy. And I got out of that business. I'm out of the elections business. And if people come back and they'll be like, well, when 13 years ago, when you were in the Obama administration, they were arguing about tax rates. What do you think the tax rate should be? I'm not going to do that anymore. They set whatever tax rates they want. They set whatever interest tariff rates they want. And when we go to set interest rates, I feel like it's my job to take those as conditions and not respond to you want a central bank to be independent. We've now gone into an environment where we've had high-level government officials, including the vice president, going on national television saying bureaucrats at the Fed should not be setting the interest rate. That should be set by the president. I don't agree with that. And I didn't agree with that before I ever got to the Fed, and I believe close to unanimous among economists. The central bank must be independent from political interference when setting the interest rates, or else inflation is coming back. That's not rooted just in theory. That's just rooted in look around the world and look at times in the United States when the central bank wasn't independent. Inflation comes back.
So let me ask you about, it is definitely possible. We have this situation right now where we have an absolutely enormous national debt, where the debt is rising at a very high rate. It is very possible for fiscal policy, and that's all fiscal. That's nothing the Fed can do about that. It is possible for fiscal policy to then create this world where it becomes a lot more expensive for the government to borrow money, and that becomes this kind of vicious cycle. And long-term interest rates start becoming incredibly important. And the White House and Congress have historically kind of dropped the ball on caring about the effects of fiscal policy on long-term interest rates. And then the Fed comes in, and I guess my question for you is, how much does the Fed even have the ability to try, because I know a lot of people on Capitol Hill think they do, how much do you have the ability to try and bring those rates down and help the country out that way?
Well, long-term rates, we don't set the long-term rates. But the argument that the Fed should cut the interest rate to make it cheaper for the government to run debt, that's the monetize the debt argument. That's literally the canonical reason why the Fed or the central bank is supposed to be independent, is precisely to prevent that. So I can't speak for anybody else, but in my head, these need to be separate. That argument doesn't. I don't find that persuasive at all. I find that scary. I mean, that if people are expecting the Fed to go set interest rates to try to make it easier to and less costly to run up more debt, I would just ask you to go look at this is not the first time somebody's had that idea. That often ends in tears.
That, I am afraid, really is all we have time for. Austan Goolsbee has been dragged off with a hook from the stage. He was staying on as long as he could, but he has a busy schedule there, man. And so, with sadness in our hearts, we say goodbye to Austan, and thank you, Austan, very much for coming on the show. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Cheyna Roth and to Jessamine Molli for producing. And thank you for being a Slate Plus member. If you're a Slate Plus member, you'll enjoy it this week. And we will be back next week with more Slate Money. And remember to check out the Slatest, Slate's daily newsletter. It's your daily update on the most urgent, surprising, and unusual news delivered straight to your inbox. A special thanks to all our Slate Plus members. If you haven't already, consider joining. Slate Plus members get unlimited access to all of Slate's journalism, plus they get ad-free podcasts, and they help support our independent reporting.